Jerusalem and its surroundings are hit by 3 attempted terror attacks as Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu describes his meeting with President Obama as one of the best ever. British Prime Minister David Cameron outlines a list of demands to the European Union as the UK's future status in the bloc remains up in the air. And tensions continue to rise in Burundi, with observers increasingly concerned the country is heading in the direction of Rwanda circa 1994.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the news today. 3 attempted terror attacks took place in and around Jerusalem today. In the first, a security guard was stabbed on a train in the upper Torzo in the Pisgat Ze'ev neighborhood by 2 Palestinian minors aged 12 and 13. The other 2 attempted stabbings were thwarted by security forces. We're now going live to I-24 News correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim, who's in Jerusalem. Good evening, Mohammed. What are the latest updates from you from Jerusalem?
Good evening, Lucy. After days of relative calm here in the city, 2 stabbing attacks took place here in the city. The first one in Pisgat Ze'ev at a train station where 2 children ages 12 and 14 attempted a stabbing operation. The 12-year-old was shot and critically injured by train security. The second was apprehended on the spot. The second attack took place here at Damascus Gate, where a 37-year-old man from the village of Isawiya, just northeast of Jerusalem, attempted a stabbing attack at army personnel, and he was shot dead on the spot. The third attack took place at a checkpoint coming into Jerusalem, where a young Palestinian man from a village north of the West Bank also attempted to stab a border police officer, but he was also shot and killed. So after relatively a few days of calm here in the city, things are heating up again.
Mohammed, for the last few days, you've been going around the West Bank, and you've been seeing and hearing what the Palestinians has to say about that. Let's talk a little bit about the Palestinians, the Palestinian people, and then let's talk about, in one way or another, the clashes in the Palestinian Authority. But first, what the Palestinians are thinking about this entire situation.
Well, let's keep things in perspective. This so-called Habba Jamahiriya, this so-called, which has many names, Intifada, is pretty much controlled by Palestinian youth, young men and women who have been taken or going to certain areas in the West Bank to protest and clash with the Israeli army. But also there is some Palestinian analysts who say that there is frustration growing within these Palestinian youth, within the Palestinians, that has been directed toward the Palestinian Authority. So there is frustration because of the lack of progress in the peace process, because of high unemployment rate within the Palestinian territory in the West Bank as well as in Gaza, and this frustration for many Palestinian youth. We can say that it's been taken against the authority, the Palestinian Authority, as well as the Israeli government, because of this lack of hope for these young men and women. But also we should say that there is clashes within the Palestinian Authority itself and the Palestinian factions. On one side, Palestinian faction leaders aren't taking responsibility or publicly coming out and taking charge of these demonstrations. However, the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas can't come out publicly and try to oppress these protesters. He doesn't want to be seen as someone who is trying to block these young people from standing up to the Israeli occupation and to the Israelis, and also because, as I said, some of this frustration is somewhat channeled at him, and he doesn't want a backlash. And also some of his nemesis, we can talk about Mohammed Dahlan, and also as Hamas on the other side, that are trying to find an opportunity where they can weaken President Abbas and maybe take over the Palestinian Authority.
Yes, Mohammed Al-Qasim, thank you very much for this. And we're moving again in the same situation, but in Washington, a day after holding what he described as one of the best meetings ever with President Obama, Premier Netanyahu addressed the General Assembly of Jewish Federations in Washington. Netanyahu stressed the importance of unity, especially in the wake of the Iran deal, which split the American Jewish community.
There is only one Jewish state, and now more than ever, we must work together to unite the Jewish people and secure the Jewish state. The second source of my confidence in Israel's future is the unshakable alliance between Israel and America, an alliance that I believe will only get stronger. And as I said yesterday, I had a very good meeting with President Obama in the White House, and I deeply appreciate his commitment to bolster Israel's security. I remain committed to a vision of two states for two peoples, where a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the Jewish state. And Israel will continue to work for peace in the hope that what is not achievable today might be achievable tomorrow.
And with me right now here in the studio is Eli Ochenberg, diplomatic correspondent for the News Today. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. We've been talking a lot about, let's say, the crack in the relationship between President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And it started when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to the Congress. Maybe it started before, but it just got bigger when he went to the Congress and addressed the Americans about the Iran deal, something that affected the Jewish community in the United States. And this speech is very important to the Jewish community, maybe to try and make peace with the Jewish community who usually votes for the Democrats and not for the Republicans.
Well, the entire Iran deal affair deeply affected both the relationship between, among the American Jewish community itself, and of course between the Jewish community in the U.S. and Israel. There was great frustration about the fact that this issue had become political, that they had to choose between their commitment to the U.S. and their commitment to Israel, between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And this is why we see, for example, that Netanyahu is meeting the senior Jewish Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer separately from the rest of the Congress leadership. It means that there are still some gaps between the understandings or the way Netanyahu is treating those Jewish members in Congress. And this speech today was highly important because Netanyahu has a lot of missions in his trip to Washington. As we know, one of them was yesterday with this meeting with Obama, and we'll talk about it shortly. But this mission is not less important to somewhat heal this rift that has become quite a serious deal since the speech to Congress.
Let's talk a little bit about the meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Barack Obama. And it seemed Benjamin Netanyahu describing it as the best meeting ever with Barack Obama. It seems like these two just got married all over again.
Something happened there without a doubt, and people can only assume what would have happened in the past 7 years if the relationship would have looked like the meeting we just saw yesterday. And the maybe one of the most exception things that both journalists and people in the close circles, both in the White House and in the Netanyahu's circle, have said that Netanyahu was in a very good mood. And usually when Netanyahu travels to Washington, I can tell you I was with him and his speech to Congress, and he was very nervous, very cranky, very stressed out. He didn't want to talk or elaborate about his thoughts. And this time, he couldn't stop talking. He couldn't stop telling how great it was. It took 45 minutes, more than expected. And he said it was a great meeting. There are some disagreements, but he didn't feel any, a grudge between them. And he was very, very pleased and released and talkative, which is not usually.
This is, what do you think? There is money involved in it? No, but we will talk about the money part. Eli Ochenberg, thank you very much for this. And I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev is in Washington covering Netanyahu's trip. She had the opportunity to speak with Isaac Herzog, Israeli opposition leader and the head of the Zionist Union. Let's see what he had to say.
Mr. Herzog, we heard today Mr. Netanyahu tell President Obama that he still believes in the two-state solution, that he is still committed to the two-state solution. Do you believe him?
I think we have no other choice but to move towards separating from the Palestinians and towards the two-state solution. I don't check the brain or the heart of the Prime Minister. All I say is that he bears a historical responsibility for the fact that if we don't move towards that solution, we will lose the nature and characteristics of the State of Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. Of course, I don't feel that we need to have a blame game right now. All I'm saying is, definitely in light of my meeting with Secretary Kerry today, that it is essential that we use an opportunity now in the region based on regional arrangements that stem from a convergence of interests with moderate Arab nations, that together we can combat terror, confront the developments of ISIL and Iran, and move towards peace with the Palestinians. This is what I've discussed with Kerry.
And you mentioned your meeting with Secretary Kerry. We've heard comments from the administration saying that they don't even see any final status agreement in the upcoming year. Is this really the horizon they are predicting for Israel?
I gather that's the feeling in the White House and in the administration, and it makes sense. There is a certain sense of despair in the international community from the positions of both leaders, from the endless blame game, from the fact that we are in one of the worst periods in history of Jew and Arab in the Holy Land. Therefore, we have to calm the situation and give hope to the people. And I insist, despite it all, despite the foggy atmosphere, despite the negative rhetoric of both sides, that we must move on. And I call upon the leaders to do so. And I've made it clear also in my appearance tonight at the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations. It's the only choice if we want to preserve the unique nature of the Jewish state of Israel.
Yeah, and like we just spoke with Eli Ochenberg, one of the main issues discussed between Netanyahu and Obama is a new military aid package for Israel in the wake of the Iran nuclear deal. Jerusalem is seeking a major increase to the current aid, which could see it top $4 billion a year. I-24 News correspondent, military correspondent Shai Ben-Ari takes an in-depth look at what such a deal would entail.
In the wake of the nuclear accord with Iran, the path has been cleared for a new U.S. military aid package to Israel. The current one is set to expire in October of 2017.
A lot of our time will be spent on a memorandum of understanding that we can potentially negotiate. It will be expiring in a couple of years, but we want to get a head start on that to make sure that both the United States and Israel can plan effectively for our defense needs going forward.
While both American and Israeli leaders have refrained from using the word compensation to describe the deal, many see it as exactly that, considering Jerusalem's intense opposition to the agreement with Tehran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly asking for an increase to around $5 billion a year. While the Americans are unlikely to agree, the final number could be around $4 billion annually, for a period lasting 10 years.
The United States supports Israel to the tune of $3 billion a year. Okay? You spent on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq $1.5 trillion. So that's 5 centuries worth of support for Israel. It's also a very solid investment in American security as well. We are an ally that doesn't ask for any American troops. We never have, and we don't intend to.
Israel is required under the current pact to spend 74% of the funds it receives in the United States itself, and a similar requirement is likely to be inserted in the new deal as well. An American team of experts is set to arrive in Israel next month to hash out the details, but many of the items on the agenda have already been outlined by the country's respective defense chiefs. They include an additional squadron of advanced F-35 fighter jets, several V-22 Osprey aircraft capable of vertical landing and takeoff, new offensive weapon systems able to discover and destroy underground tunnels and bunkers, and the development of new cyber warfare capabilities. The current aid package does not include an additional $500 million spent annually on joint missile defense programs like Iron Dome, Arrow 3, and David Sling. This supplementary aid is set to continue and could also be increased. Exactly which of these desired weapons and programs will be included in the new defense package will be determined by the negotiators. Talks are expected to last several months.
And with me right now here in the studio is Dani Agnello, a former Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister. Good evening.
Hello, Lucy.
And also Amir Oren, defense and government analyst for our daily newspaper. Good evening. You wanted to reiterate about something about Isaac Herzog.
Yes. The main purpose of the Netanyahu visit is domestic, rather than repairing his ruptured relationship with Obama. This should be looked at with a view to a shakeup of the Netanyahu government. Bennett out, Herzog in, Herzog as foreign minister. Therefore, Herzog has this week bolstered his own power within the Labour Party, and Netanyahu, all of a sudden, seemingly unprovoked, goes to the White House and says, I am for a two-state solution, which is going to enable Herzog to come in. So if it happens, you heard it first here, and I have a witness here. If it doesn't happen, I deny that I ever said it, and I have a witness here too. Another thing, Netanyahu, we saw him right now saying that Israel never asked for American troops. It depends on how you define troops, because as you know, there is a regular training exercise called Juniper Cobra, and American troops who man surface-to-surface systems to intercept missiles come here, train here, and are supposed to defend Israel. Of course, the Israeli Defense Forces will take...
He meant troops on the ground, Amir Oren.
Yes, he probably meant ground combat troops. However, these troops may also come under fire because Hezbollah rockets and Hamas rockets and perhaps Iranian missiles could rain on American troops, anti-aircraft, anti-missile troops, as well as on Israeli ones.
The way that you just
twisted
everything,
yes,
it's just amazing.
Didn't you ask me to?
No.
Well, my esteemed colleague, of course, Amir Oren is very versed with Israeli politics as well. I will beg to not relate to Israeli domestic politics because I'm not as expert as Amir. So I will talk only about the foreign policy and what's happening with the Americans and Israelis.
And I want to just point out something. After the big rift about the Iran nuclear deal, and after Israel understands that it cannot affect any more about what is happening with Iran, if you were attending, and you attended meetings like that between prime ministers and presidents, from where he started, when he,
So this is something which may relate to what Amir said, because there is no doubt in my mind that when it comes to the policy, aside from Iran and the compensation package that Israel is going to get, the other thing which is very high on the mind of the Obama administration and himself, of course, personally, is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And here, to have such a great ambience and a great meeting, as reported by the Prime Minister himself, there had to be some give. It's not that we just take all the time. And the give, I believe, is not just the declaration to the press about the two-state solution, but I'm sure there's also something relating to building in the settlements.
The settlements, exactly.
And exactly. Building in the settlements on the one hand, probably restricting it in a very major way, maybe without even saying it.
When you're saying that, and we are talking, one of the major, let's say, issues between the Israelis and the Palestinians is the building and the settlements. If the meeting went so good, if he got the money, and like you said, he needed to give something, this is something that he would have to give. This is something that will break this government. This is something that will make the Jewish Home Party get out of the government.
Right. This is intended to get Jewish Home out. And very soon, because for most on Netanyahu's mind is the appointment of the new Attorney General, because Yehuda Weinstein is about to finish his 6-year term, and Netanyahu doesn't want Minister of Justice Ayelet Shaked to have any impact on the identity of the new Attorney General. This is the most important appointment for him.
She's still the deputy, you know.
She's still the minister.
She's still, yes, but if her party is about
somebody else in my mind.
to be kicked, no, not Tzipi Hotobelli.
Yes, yes.
If her party and Bennett's is about to be kicked out, Netanyahu will be able to portray himself as a centrist. He will have only Kahlon, Deri, and Herzog in his cabinet. He will show the world a more moderate face, and he will get to name the new Attorney General himself without any interference.
You see how versed this is with the...
Amazing.
But the connection is, he sees the trade-off, a unity government for Iran, and I see Palestinian track for Iran, but it all comes to the same place.
How did he manage the whole incident with Barat? And I'm trying to understand that because after Joe Biden saying no one will offend any American president or official, point.
Lucy, I have seen, I know...
How did he maneuver this?
I know Joe Biden very well when he was still a senator, and I never saw him so angry.
He was really.
He was angry. I think Barat is going to be another casualty of this good trip, because I don't think he will be appointed. Probably they will find a way for Barat himself to say, well, I no longer seek this job because I have other plans.
He will be renamed Barack Obama.
and he will save Netanyahu the humiliation and
from firing him.
Exactly.
From firing him.
Can we have one line about the package?
Small line.
Okay. The Americans always give Israel what they consider non-offensive systems. Boots on the ground, tanks, occupy. They do not give such weapons. Planes can attack and come back to base.
But also because we don't need tanks. We have production here, the Merkava, and also other ground munitions and ground equipment. So it also goes together.
And they lived happily ever after. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
We're going to somewhere else in the world. British Prime Minister David Cameron delivered a major address today on the future of the UK's status in the European Union. The Premier said he hoped to make good progress with reforms of the EU by next month, but gave no fresh sign of when he plans to hold a referendum on the matter. Ellie Ochenberg has the details.
If we vote to leave, then we leave, so proclaimed Britain's Prime Minister Tuesday, referring to his campaign promise to hold a referendum to determine his country's future status in the European Union.
There'll be those who say, here and elsewhere in the EU, that what we're embarked on is somehow mission impossible. I say, why? I do not deny that seeking changes, which require the agreement of 27 other democracies, all with their own concerns, is a big task. But an impossible one? I do not believe so for a minute.
While any vote is unlikely to take place before next summer, Cameron revealed in greater detail reforms he expects the EU to implement. A letter sent to Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, outlines the UK's main objectives, which, if not actualized, will threaten its ongoing membership in the EU. Legal protection for Britain from problems with the single currency market, restricting for 4 years EU migrants' access to British labour benefits such as tax credits, increased competitiveness by cutting the burden on businesses, strengthening the role of national parliaments.
Britain is the world's 5th largest economy. We have extensive connections around the world, not only in the European Union, but through our permanent membership of the Security Council of the United Nations. We're a leading member of NATO. We are members of the Commonwealth, the leading members of the Commonwealth. If we had to operate outside the European Union, we would do so.
These demands are likely to draw mixed reactions throughout the bloc, with EU leaders set to discuss them next month in Brussels.
And with me right now from London is Jonathan Sashadoti, I-24 News contributor. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening, Lucy.
So with all this list of demands that the UK just gave the UN, the EU, I'm sorry, do you think that this will pass in one way or another?
Well, this is definitely a big job for David Cameron to sell these reforms. He's actually got to get the 27 other EU states to agree to these individually. But that's not the only battle he has on his hands. He's also got to get his own Eurosceptic MPs in the Conservative Party to agree that these are enough. And he's got to get those who want to stay within Europe to agree that this is a strong way of keeping Europe together with Britain in it, so that that referendum that he's promised to the British people will result in a stay vote. So really this is a big ask, and this is something that David Cameron is hoping will satisfy all those interested parties.
Jonathan, I'm trying to understand something. He said one day before he said something to the Industrial Committee, and one day after he's saying something completely else. Where is he standing on this issue?
Well, Cameron's made it clear that the certain things that he sees as fundamental for renegotiation are based around issues of sovereignty, migration, benefits, and these sorts of things, which are of great concern to many people in the United Kingdom. This is the first time that he's properly put them down in writing in this letter and then in the speech today, explaining exactly what it is he wants. Some of those things, for example, include a 4-year freeze on any EU migrants in the UK being able to claim in-work benefits. That means essentially that they have to pay into the system before they can draw out of it as people working there. But there are already those in Europe who are saying that that would be illegal and against the common principle of freedom of movement between the European countries. So all of these things are going to be at play in the negotiations that take place in order for Britain to have set a new renegotiated term for its place in Europe, and for the British people then to go to the polls and decide whether they think that enough has been done to ensure that they will get what they need as individuals and for Britain as a state within the European Union.
Just in a short answer, Jonathan, if you can, if the polls were conducted right now, what would be the result?
If I could tell you that, I don't think we'd need to bother. But the truth is, Britain is pretty split on this, and it's about finding the right settlement here so that people can feel that Britain's sovereignty is protected.
Jonathan Sashadoti, thank you very, very much for this. And we are going out for a small break, and then 2 minutes, of course, and then I'll be back with the second part of the news today. We'll talk about Burundi, we'll talk about Wales, and we will talk about a lot more things. Just stay with us. 2 minutes, and I'll be back. Jerusalem and its surroundings are hit by 3 attempted terror attacks as Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu describes his meeting with President Obama as one of the best ever. British Prime Minister David Cameron outlines a list of demands to the European Union as the UK's future status in the bloc remains up in the air. And tensions continue to rise in Burundi, with observers increasingly concerned in the country. The country is heading in the direction of Rwanda circa 1994. Welcome back to the news today. According to the United Nations, violence sparked by a political crisis in Burundi is in the danger of escalating to mass atrocity crimes. Some 200 people have been killed in the country and tens of thousands displaced since President Pierre Nkurunziza won a 3rd term in office in the contested election in July. I-24 News correspondent Ur Shapira has more.
Is Burundi on the verge of genocide? The UN warned Tuesday that violence in the African country is in danger of escalating to committing crimes of mass atrocity following a series of killings which found at least 240 people dead. The UN said it is even less equipped to handle the violence in Burundi than it was in Rwanda in 1994.
And recent inflammatory remarks by members of the government have suggested that this crisis, which has involved targeting people for their perceived political affiliations, could increasingly take on an ethnic dimension.
The current round of violence in Burundi began last April after President Pierre Nkurunziza decided to run for a 3rd term. Tens of thousands of people fled to neighboring states. On Saturday, the government launched a forced disarmament procedure. However, Burundi's Minister of Foreign Affairs insists that the country is not in flames.
The government remains ready to work further with its partners so that first and foremost there will no longer be fear of genocide.
Earlier this week, Rwandan President Paul Kagame gave an emotional speech asking Burundi to avoid the same mistake his country fell victim to more than 20 years ago. Officials in Burundi dismissed the remarks, saying they are indecent and unfair. Meanwhile, violence continues in Burundi as authorities and the international community keep their eyes wide shut.
Yes, and with me right now is Andrew Green, freelance journalist covering East Africa. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
So, Andrew, we are seeing the, let's say, approach the president of Rwanda is trying to say to Burundi, to the people in Burundi, and it seems that it's not helping. And it seems that the people there don't understand that it can go to a really, really worse place.
Yes, I mean, I think we've seen any number of interventions over really the last 6 months that have had little impact on the Burundian political leaders. And as a result, the violence has continued and it continues to deteriorate in the country. You're seeing tens of thousands of people who have fled, and now we're hearing numbers in the hundreds who are being killed extrajudicially on the streets. So really, this is just a terrible situation, and no one really seems to be able to control it at the moment.
You know, Andrew, I'm trying to understand, can the people really uprise, or can the people really protest against what Nkurunziza and the government is doing? Because from what we're hearing, from what we're reading, from what we're seeing, basically these people, if they go against what is happening, their end is not so good.
Exactly, and that the extrajudicial killings that have increased since the election have really been that the tipping point was the vote. Before, you would see people out on the streets, people protesting with there were possible repercussions, but not the same level of violence, that people being dragged out of their homes at night, people being pulled out of their cars during the middle of the day, taken away, and then their bodies discovered a few days later. Really, there's just no room for political dissent at this point anymore in Burundi.
Andrew, where is Nkurunziza in this specific case?
He's still in the capital, Bujumbura. He's still governing as if he won his third term free and fairly, despite the fact that none of the international monitors signed off on the election that took place, and despite the fact that all of the political parties except for one major opposition party boycotted the election. But he's just continued to rule as if he's won a mandate from the people.
When the military and the government is controlling the streets in such a great matter, do you think that the people can actually uprise? Do you think that this can deteriorate even further?
Well, I think one of the key elements to look at will be the split that's happening within both the army and the police. The police have really been on Nkurunziza's side up until now, and that's likely to continue. However, you could see a continued fragmentation of the army. We've already seen one coup attempt several months ago. There's reason to think that if there's a continued
If we are looking at, I'm sorry, we lost the connection with you, Andrew. We will try to get him further in the show, but let's continue. According to U.S. officials, Russian communications intercepted by American intelligence agencies showed Moscow believed the plane that crashed in Sinai was brought down by a bomb. The intercepts are among pieces of evidence leading Washington to suspect that a device planted on the craft exploded shortly after takeoff from the resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Egypt and Russia have yet to formally announce the cause of the disaster and initially dismissed American and British assessments. And we're going to Myanmar. Fresh results from Myanmar's election on Tuesday showed the opposition taking control of most regional assemblies, as well as forming the next government handing democracy champion Aung San Suu Kyi sweeping powers and reshaping the political landscape. Ayman Siksik has the latest.
A sweeping victory for opponents to Myanmar's decades-long military rule. Aung San Suu Kyi, leader of the National League for Democracy, reiterated Tuesday that her win places her above the country's presidency, a position she's constitutionally barred from holding.
Simply that, above the president, I make all the decisions because I'm the leader of the winning party. He'll have to understand this perfectly well, that he will have no authority.
But after decades of military rule in the Southeast Asian nation, can Suu Kyi implement widespread democratic reforms? It's a burning question, considering 25% of the seats in parliament are still reserved for the military. Accordingly, the international community is watching closely.
The process went better than many expected beforehand. It is also true, however, more reforms are needed to ensure that truly genuine elections can take place in the future.
It was in the early 60s that the military seized power in Burma. Not until 20 years later did the junta even promise to hold democratic elections. By the late 1980s, economic hardship prompted students to take to Burma's streets, even in face of aggressive actions by military officials. These protesters would later form the grassroots activists of the NLD, Suu Kyi's democracy-demanding party. Then 45 years old, Suu Kyi promised change, and in 1990 she delivered, winning an election in a landslide. But the junta backtracked, annulled her win, and advised Suu Kyi to leave Myanmar or remain under house arrest. Fast forward a quarter century, the leader of Myanmar's military vowed Tuesday to respect the will of the people. It's a long-standing promise that still remains unfulfilled.
We are going to talk about something maybe that it is a positive thing. The SeaWorld theme park in California plans to phase out their controversial yet iconic killer whale show. ABC News has more.
Baby Shamu! SeaWorld says its attendance in San Diego is still falling, but not as briskly. As it tries to reverse that trend, it's going to be doing it with everything but killer whales.
As SeaWorld works to refine what it has always excelled at, which is providing a meaningful experience and an understanding of the ocean and its animals, I think that the public will respond favorably to that.
Robert Gleason is going to help the park redefine itself. He grew up going to SeaWorld, and now he's the president of Evans Hotels, owner of the nearby Bahia and Catamaran. SeaWorld announced an agreement with the chain to explore building a 300-room hotel on the property, a $70 million project.
It'll offer visitors a seamless experience with the park, a dedicated entrance. It'll allow them to deepen their experience from SeaWorld.
But that's not all. SeaWorld said it may develop a new attraction. It also announced it has acquired the rights to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The character will play a key role in the park's holiday festivities. And for those at the park, SeaWorld will have a new smartphone app complete with interactive maps, line information, pay-as-you-go, and even a way to find your car in the parking lot.
Seamless experience with
Gleason says he expects SeaWorld to grow for years to come.
We believe in their product. We believe in their commitment to education and conservation and the treatment of animals in their care.
Yes, and we're moving to climate change. Climate change will take center at the major summit in Paris last month, but scientists have gotten a jump start as global warming causes the polar ice caps to retreat. Here's more from our I-24 News desk.
Working through the night and in freezing temperatures, these scientists are sending their probe to collect samples from the depths of the Arctic Ocean. A race against the clock to uncover the secrets of the world's smallest and least studied ocean.
The water is being sampled to analyze different trace metals, for example, iron, manganese, aluminium. I think some people is also working with isotopes. I'm working with lead isotopes, iron isotopes, zinc, cadmium, so a bunch of trace metals are being analyzed.
Each summer, the Amundsen icebreaker acts as a floating laboratory for around 40 scientists. But the reach of their work stretches far past the territory within the North Pole.
Les changements de l'Arctique ont des influences qui vont bien plus loin que l'Arctique elle-même, mais elles vont...
The Arctic changes have influences that go beyond the Arctic itself and will particularly affect the North Atlantic, and possibly even the ocean as a whole.
L'Atlantique Nord, c'est une zone de formation d'eau profonde.
The melting ice caps risk reducing the salinity of the world's oceans. This could alter the currents and the movement of warm and cold water between the poles and the equator, potentially making the Earth uninhabitable. To get a better idea of what might happen, Natalie is collecting ice cores to measure their salt composition.
We study how the thickness of the different strata of ice are changing.
Based on their findings, these Arctic specialists are categorical. The top of the world has already warmed by 3 degrees Celsius since the beginning of the industrial age, and climate change is speeding up.
And with me right now is Lionel Friedfeld to talk a little bit about economy. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So let's talk about General Electric that lands $2.6 billion.
Yeah, it's a huge contract. Actually, see, in India is going to upgrade, the railway system, and General Electric's they're going to provide 1,000, what is called locomotives, for trains, and it's going to be gasoline driven. They're going to also set up a plant in India, but they're not the only one also to get from this huge contract. Also, French company Alstom is going to provide 800 locomotive, which is going to be electric. They're also going to set up a plant in India, and basically it's part of the strategy of the President Modi, which is making India, which actually ask investors to come and invest in India to manufacture things.
What does it mean for the Indian economy? What is this kind of a deal? And we know that India is going towards a new, let's say, prosperity and economy reforms. What does it mean for it?
It's a great deal for India because in the past, you had foreign investors could not invest freely in certain sectors. So now for the sectors of railway, it's 100% availability from foreign investors. And tomorrow, maybe you will have financial investors, you will have people that can also invest in IT in different sectors that will be free to invest in India and actually develop the country.
This is a big trust coming from General Electric to India. And like you're saying, this is giving like a good signal to other companies. What are the chances that other companies will actually come and invest in India?
I think large corporates will go in India. It's one of the the feist country with China, and actually here we're speaking about a huge market for $137 billion. So GE will have a piece, Alstom will have a piece, but we can think of other companies like Bombardier from Canada, which is also very active in a train.
Okay, so if you mentioned China, let's talk about the new revolution in China and allowing to have another child, and this means good things for China.
I think it's a really good policy. They're going to give up the one-child policy, and every family will be able to have 2 kids. First of all, it's good on a personal level, but also it's very good on the economic level. Financial analysts believe that it will at least bring, around 0.5% of growth on GDP each year. Why? Because simply, if you have a larger family, you will need larger building, and to do new home, you will have to do education, and also you're going to have another individual that will be contribute to the workforce of China. And basically, at the end of the day, you will have consumers that are going to spend a lot of money on Chinese product in China, and this is the goal of the Chinese party.
I'm trying, since when when is the time that they will start this new policy? And, it will take time because, I will bring another child and it will take him time to grow up and to be actually a workforce in the community. This takes time.
Everything takes time, but China is a huge country. The population, is enormous, and they give a policy. And policy are usually long-term policy in between. The term is like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, because whatever it comes, China comes very slowly, but they know that at the end of the world, at the end of the day, they're going to take over the world.
Yeah, but there's you have kindergarten, you have school, and you have high school, and then you have university, and then you go out and work. So it will take probably a long time. Thank you very much, Lionel.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about art. A Modigliani nude painting was sold to an unnamed Chinese buyer at Christie's on Monday for more than $170.4 million, the second highest price ever for a work of art at auction, as deep-pocketed collectors continue to pay big for some rare masterpieces up for sale in this year's Ottoman auction season. The sale is the second only to Picasso, which sold for $179 million at Christie's in May. Yes, more than $170 million. This is a lot. And because of Jonathan Regev is not here and he is homesick, feel good, Jonathan, we are changing a course a little bit. Cristiano Ronaldo is best known for his work on football pitch. You know, to see how good he is, you want to see a little bit more. Michael Friedman prepared for you this piece.
Cristiano Ronaldo is known for his ability on the football pitch, but is now being featured on the big screen. Ronaldo, his personal portrait film, premiered in London on Monday night, providing plenty of excitement for football lovers. Fans gathered around London to get a glimpse of CR7 and witness the film. This was a special night for the Portuguese forward, who is happy to share his life with his supporters.
Great reaction. I just feel happy because the people who know me, they're not going to surprise because they know that I'm like that. But I did the movie for the fans because I think they deserve that, because they are always with me in the good moments and in the bad moments. So the first reason to do this movie is because of them.
The night was filled with reporters and those who have been influential in Ronaldo's life, such as former Manchester United manager Sir Alex Ferguson. This documentary goes deep into the life and career of Ronaldo, including intimate moments at home between the footballer and his 5-year-old son.
Everybody knows Cristiano as a player, but as a father and out of the pitch is really, I think that you should see the movie.
For those who only know Ronaldo as a footballer, the film provides a new light on him as a person, something compelling for many CR7 enthusiasts.
He lives actually a relatively, strict life. Comes home and trains and sleeps and does that. It's no mad partying, and so that was a surprise.
Ronaldo signed autographs and took pictures with the fans in Leicester Square. The 30-year-old and 3-time Ballon d'Or winner has made a name for himself, being regarded as one of the greatest footballers of all time. As Ronaldo made the transition from football star to movie star, the icon appears to have a long and prosperous life once he hangs up his boots.
The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities revealed the preliminary results of the Scam Pyramids project, indicating an anomaly in the Great Pyramid that could uncover the secrets of ancient Egyptian structure. I-24 News reporter Mirav Savir with the story.
Egyptologists may be one step closer to discovering the secrets of the ancient pyramids. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities announced initial results of the Scam Pyramids project, which began in late October. And these preliminary results point towards what they call an anomaly in the Pyramid of Khufu.
When you see the surface temperature of the pyramid, you will find that it's more or less homogeneous, except these 3 blocks where the temperature is 6 degrees higher than the pyramids.
But the reason for the thermal difference is still unknown.
If you have the same material in a structure, you're expecting to have in the same orientation, more or less, you expect to have the same thermal signature. So the fact that you have an important difference of temperature between just one block and the other right next to it, it has to mean something, because it's not normal.
The team used infrared thermography and non-invasive cosmic rays on the 4,500-year-old pyramid, and this new discovery paves the way for more groundbreaking research.
I think this will be a start for new science, new research for all the Egyptologists, especially the Egyptologists who are interested in the ancient Egyptian architects.
Researchers identified areas they will use for long-term recording and say they will install a camera that will record day and night for a year in hopes of one day solving this new mystery.
Yes, and we're going to Australia. Australian authorities have regained control of a controversial immigration detention center after the death of an asylum seeker sparked rioting that led to at least 5 injuries. Inmates of the remote Australian outpost of Christmas Islands were torn down and fires were lit, forcing guards to abandon the facility. Asylum seekers are a hot political issue in Australia, where successive governments have vowed to stop them reaching the mainland. Yes, and let's go to Starbucks. Yes, the United States. I know it's a little bit messy today, but we will explain to you. Starbucks coffee in the U.S. has been raising eyebrows because it changed its cup for Christmas. But for some coffee drinkers, including GOP candidate Donald Trump, it's just not Christmassy enough. ABC News.
When Starbucks red cups return, it's a signal the holiday season is drawing near. And in years past, the red cups displayed various types of holiday designs. They're back every year on November 1st. Well, the red cups are still red, all right, but this year they're missing a little something. And that is a big problem for former Arizona pastor Joshua Feuerstein, who, we asked Lynchburg customers for their thoughts on the cup controversy.
Well, I feel like we have a red cup, which is Christmassy. I don't feel like that's declaring war on anti-Christmas. I'm not sure. It seems like a lot of fuss.
I really don't have any thoughts. It works for me.
A Starbucks spokesperson tells me the purpose of the simple cranberry red cup is twofold: to create a sense of calm amidst the bustle of the holidays, and also to inspire customers to create their own designs and doodles.
You're not finding it as some big war on Christmas?
No. I mean, it doesn't affect my beliefs in believing that Jesus was born, and it's just a red cup. It doesn't mean anything.
And with me to put some order is correspondent and author Agman Siksik. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
You are here to talk about controversy, about Scientology, about a lot of good details coming from Hollywood.
Yes, a little bit of gossip this week on Bookmarks, Lucy.
Oh, and what are we going to talk about?
Well, Leah Remini, who you remember from King of Queens, she was also a host on The View. She was basically adopted as a child into Scientology because her mother was a Scientologist. And she writes this book years after, some would say, her biggest years of fame. She's now making a huge comeback with this book, giving interviews everywhere, detailing her life in Scientology, 30 years as a Scientologist, and it's full of amazing, crunchy, delicious details.
People don't see the spark in your eyes when you're talking because it's delicious for you. So just talk. Just give us a little bit from the gossip.
Well, let's start with the background details. I think the most important thing about this book is that it gives us really an insight into the relationship between Scientology and celebrities, how they go after celebrities, how they court them, and why celebrities are important to Scientology to spread the word, to glamorize Scientology to other people, and for the money. Leah Remini, during 30 years as a Scientologist, gave $5 million to the Church of Scientology. Now, people give money there to advance in the levels of Scientology, become a higher and higher rank. There are ranks in Scientology, much like any other church. But let's get to what everyone wants to hear about, and that's Tom Cruise.
Yes.
The Scientologist with the capital T-H-E. Now, the first thing that we learned about Tom Cruise here is, and this may not surprise a lot of people, is he has some weird practices.
Really?
Yes.
No.
In one instance, he invited both her, Leah Remini, and other celebrities to his huge mansion to play hide and seek. She thought he was kidding, but he meant to literally play hide and seek in his ginormous mansion.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm totally serious, and so is she. And when he's distressed, he just calms himself down by saying, LRH is here, LRH is here. That's L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, whom he approaches as a god. Now, you and I were not invited to the Tom Cruise-Katie Holmes wedding, but she was. And she tells us that she was separated from her best friend Jennifer Lopez, who they wanted to recruit. and the Surrey there was under a lot of pressure.
Just suddenly, Top Gun doesn't seem attractive anymore. Thank you very much, Aima Siksik. We're going out for a break, an update from our news desk, and then we will be back for the third part of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the news today. The Israel Democracy Institute released a major study today that paints a gloomy picture of relations between the country's Jewish majority and Arab minority populations. The survey comes on the background of heightened tensions between the two communities amid the ongoing wave of violence. Joining me now to discuss are Dr. Hani Zubaydah, political science at the Israel Valley Academic College. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And Dov Halbertal, former bureau head for Israel's chief rabbi. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. Let's talk a little bit about some of the numbers that we saw today. And we're talking about, I will just start painting something. 75% of the Jewish Israelis believe to some degree that decisions crucial to peace and security of the country should be made by Jews. From the other side, over 70% of Arab Israelis disagree to some degree with the statement all Arab citizens of Israel should be obliged at the age of 18 to perform some of the national service. And I will give more numbers just in the upcoming discussion, but this is a rift. There is a rift between the Arab minority and the Jewish majority in Israel. And these numbers, and of course waves of violence, just make the situation even more complicated, because eventually, after the Palestinians are leaving the scene, the ones who are staying with the major problem are the Arab minority in Israel. And this is something that you cannot just fix a day after.
No, but what's new? The sheer numbers, the fact that we see the numbers in front of our eyes, this is a process that's been going on even before the initiation of the Israeli state. Let me be very clear about this. The Israeli state, when it was instituted in 1948, ever since, Israel has done everything in order to brand the Arabs as the other, the fifth column, the enemy from within. If we're not even talking about social perception of the Arab and their status, let's talk about infrastructure. The Arabs were always left behind. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, who said during the elections the Arab are driving to the polls in droves, in buses, please come out and vote. He didn't. Well, the sheer fact of him saying that was problematic, but the subtext is always there. When Rabin had a government, yes, Arab are a problem. When Rabin was the head of the state in '92, the prime minister, when he decided to go for the Oslo Accord, everybody here in Israel, the debate was whether it was legitimate to do that with the Arab support, because without the Arabs, he didn't have enough Jewish Zionist parties to support the move. The question is, how can we fix that? Or is the question, is that the issue? The issue is there. Now, the fixing will take time. The fixing needs to mend fences with the Arab infrastructure, with the Arab education, with the fact that we need to see the Arab not as the other, but part of the Israeli state. The Israeli anthem, when Jews sing the Israeli anthem, you see a lot of excitement in their eyes. But when you refer to an Arab and you ask him, why won't you sing the Israeli anthem? Not seeing the paradox in asking an Arab to sing a song about the Jewish yearning to Zion is a problem. And it goes on in the examples.
I want to take it from the Jewish religion perspective, because, you know, the Jewish people all their lives know what it is to be a minority in outside of Israel. They know how it feels to be suppressed under bigger majorities. They know they went through the Holocaust. How come? And I want you to take it from the religious perspective. How come the Jewish society that went through the Holocaust is getting to a point where it's racist through a minority living in its own country?
I, as a religious one, ask the same question. I think the answer is that we are in a conflict. If we will solve this conflict, Palestinian now, conflict Israeli-Palestinian, it will change completely because we are rooted, we, as you said, the Jewish, the religious Jewish especially, in giving respect to the other, being Arab, being another one, no matters. We are obliged to have respect to the others, but the conflict disturbs it. We are in a very, very difficult conflict. We have to have two nations. We are living one with the other. That's the reality, and we have to know it and to acknowledge it, and then everything will be changed.
I want to take you to the fact that a lot of analysts will say that this war between Arabs and Jews, between the Palestinians and Israelis, is a war of religion. And I'm wondering, and I'm asking myself, how come, and if you're saying that this is also a political solution, we need to solve the conflict in order to solve the problems between the Arabs and the Jews, or the Muslims and the Jews, or the Arab Christians and the Jews, how come until now in each and every peace process there was no one religious figure sitting in the table and trying to explain to both sides the perspective that is coming from religion?
They are. You are not talking about it. There are a lot. There were a lot.
Well, there was one very prominent who said something about it.
No, but we, the religious people, are not in the front of the state. You know, you have the Likud, you have the Labor, but we, the religious people, are rooted, as you said, as you told before, on the concept of peace, of loving the other, respecting the other. You know, we are growing on it. This conflict, it's amazing because it's very easy. I think it's very easy to solve it. We have to know that we are two people in the same country, and we have to separate, each given his country, then to respect each other. It's not understandable how it came to such, a dispute.
Let's put more numbers into this perspective. Okay, 60% of Jews, according to the same survey, 60% of Jews are in favor of revoking the rights of citizens who do not declare loyalty to the state of Israel or loyalty to the Jewish state and serve in the IDF. Give another example. Over 70% of Arab Israelis disagree to some degree with the statement all Arab citizens of Israel should, I'm sorry, I already said it, 87% of the Arabs think to some degree that they are discriminated against when compared to the Jewish population. Today we saw something that happened in the Knesset. Lev organization, an extreme Jewish right organization, is being discussed about the fact that maybe it should be outlawed. The head of the Lehava organization, Benzi Gopstein, is getting into the parliament house. This guy is talking so many racist things and doing so many racist things in the state of Israel that the mess that we're seeing here is maybe understandable, because how come a person who is talking racist statements each and every day, and his job is to separate between the Arabs and the Jews, is giving the stage in the parliament? This is the freedom of democracy. How come Arabs won't feel discriminated in the Jewish state?
There is a very thin line that breaks between democracy and non-democratic acts. And let me be specific. My colleague here said, we the religious. Let me start and try to somehow deconstruct the notion of religious when it comes to Jewish people. We have ultra-Orthodox, we have nationalist Jews, the Jewish home, and we have the traditionalist, three different types of religious Jews. Within these three groups, there's a completely different perception of how the state should look like. Among these, in each and every group, we have extremes. Benzi Gopstein and the Lahava organization is a racist organization, period. When the entire country went head over heels due to Hanin Zo'bi speech in Holland, and people said, how come she compares the Jewish state to the Nazi regime and so on and so forth? Benzi Gopstein is not saying anything different than Hanin Zo'bi.
But she is a member of parliament and he is not.
Exactly. But the fact is that while
Doesn't give her the right, of course.
Of course, but when she does this comparison, and she's being ostracized by almost every media outlet in Israel, and she's being hammered left and right, Bentzi Gopstein is being asked to come to the Knesset, and he says to a member of the Knesset, if it was up to me, you would be in prison or expelled from the country.
Oh, well, you know, he said this to me
To you as well.
in a live show on Channel 2, and he said it that my place is not here, but I have 22 other countries to go and find myself another place. Let's talk to join this conversation. Yochanan Plesner, president of Israel Democracy Institute. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me.
So, Mr. Plesner, I'm trying to understand, you know, each and every time that we are experiencing here a war or a wave of terror, these numbers usually increase. The hate among or between Jewish and Arabs in Israel increase. People don't want to listen. People don't want to be tolerant. People don't want to have maybe an opportunity for a conversation, for coexistence. And I'm asking myself if the period wasn't, or the time wasn't so tough like the time that we're experiencing right now, the numbers would be the same.
Well, it's a good question, but actually the figures that you're relating to that were published today in the Democracy Index of 2015, the actual data was collected before the recent wave of violence. So probably if we would have collected the data and conducted the survey in the past few weeks, the situation or the level of tension between Jews and Arabs in Israel would have been even much worse. So in some respects, the data that we see here preceded, or if you will, predicted the violence that we're seeing right now, because you know, if we're translating from Hebrew, the writing was on the wall when it comes to the degrees of tension between Jews and Arabs.
You know, Mr. Plesner, I'm trying to understand if it's something that is coming from the society itself, or it's something that is being given like a kosher signature from the government, from the, let's say, atmosphere coming from our leaders, that is making people realize and understand that either they don't have a place in the Israeli society, or on the other side, they should just not be part of the Israeli society.
Well, I mean, the answer is, and we can also base it on the data from the Democracy Index. The answer is both directions. On the one hand, especially at times like this, leadership has a very important role. The leadership has a very important responsibility in enabling, in providing an example, enabling coexistence, legitimizing tolerance, equality. And when I'm talking about leadership, it's both political leadership, religious, academic, both Arab leaders and Jewish leaders. The leadership has an important role to play, and in many cases, this role is not exercised. But what we're also seeing is that the underlying suspicion between the two populations does not only emanate as a result of bad leadership. I'll just give you an example. A majority of Israelis do not think that if Israeli Arabs define themselves as Palestinians with an Israeli citizenship, that they can actually be loyal citizens while they also identify with as Palestinians, and the Palestinians are an active enemy of the state of Israel. So for many Israelis, they just don't accept the notion that an option of multiple identities for an individual exists, and therefore they become very suspicious. And what we see is that they don't support, for example, equal participation in decision-making, in national level decision-making for Arab citizens.
Yes.
So there's some underlying, deep-rooted reasons for that we need to deal with.
Yes, Yochanan Plesner, thank you very much for this explanation. You know, we are hearing this the fact that people don't want to realize that some Arabs who are living here, and the majority maybe of Arabs who are living here, have relatives in the Palestinian Authority, have relatives in the Gaza Strip. And people, the Jewish society, either it's not educated and doesn't know that actually people here have relatives, family relatives, blood relatives in the other side, and this is why maybe they see themselves as Palestinians, and it should not contradict. What is it exactly?
I don't see any problem. It's always like the Jewish people, for example, in the States. They have relatives here. They can identify with the relatives here and being very loyal to the state. I cannot understand what the problem even. The whole problem is the conflict, the Palestinian conflict. Once solving this problem, nothing will be a problem.
Is it only solving the Palestinian problem?
Well, solving the Palestinian problem would open a can of worms within the Israeli society. Mizrahim, Ashkenazim, gender issues, LGBT issues, periphery center, upper class, lower class. It's a masquerade. We need to understand, with all due respect, and to the things that Yochanan Plesner said, there's a problem of socialization. The school system is not socializing Israeli citizens to become citizens that view the other as an equal. And when that will happen, when we'll see the other as an equal, then we will start having a sound base for democracy.
Because of the conflict.
Not
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me in this case. And that's it for tonight. Tomorrow we'll be here again with a new show from the Jaffa Port, Israel. Have peace. Have a great night.